Hey everybody, this is Aileen Christensen coming to you from Amsterdam. I am the Scopus marketing manager. We are just going to give people another minute or so just to trickle in. We know we have a lot of people registered for this webinar. And so yeah, we'll just see, we'll give it about another minute or two. Okay, it's 2 minutes past the hour and I don't want people to have to wait too long for this either. And the webinar is being recorded, so anyone who has joined or anyone who has registered will also receive a link to the recording. So as I said, my name is Aileen Christensen, Scopus Marketing Manager based in Amsterdam. And it is a stifling 30 degrees here at the moment, although as an Australian, maybe I should be able to deal with it being a little bit hotter than that. So today we're going to be discussing how you can stay up to date with new content using the Scopus API. In a few minutes, I'm going to hand it over to Martin Edling Andersson, who is our Principal Product Manager, who's one of today's presenters. And then at the end of the webinar, I will come back with some questions to the presenters. So next slide, please, Martin. Great, thanks. Okay, so as I said, my name is Aileen Christensen, Scopus Marketing Manager. I'll be moderating. So if you do have questions, please pop them in the Q&A section rather than the chat, because otherwise I'm going to have to try and toggle between the two of them. I'll share with you some useful resources when I come back at the end. I'll just be moderating and making sure that everyone can hear everything, and I'll also try and share some resources throughout as well. So the first presenter, as I said, is Martin Edling Andersson. You may have seen him on some of the other Scopus API webinars. He's been at Elsevier since 2011. And then at Elsevier, he has worked as part of the Cyval team and then joined the Scopus team in late 2019, where he's the principal product manager working on Scopus APIs. The other person may not be as familiar to you. This is Serhiy, and he is the one of the senior software engineers and has worked on as a front-end developer for more than 10 years. He's been with Elsevier for just a couple of months, I believe, since the 1st of June. And he'll be giving a demo on how to use the Scopus APIs to build a feed and stay up to date on the latest content. And then the next slide, please, Martin. Just to give you a quick overview of what we'll be covering. If you have seen our previous webinars, we are going to go over just some of the content that we have before, just to make sure that we're all on the same page in case someone is new on one of these calls. So just we'll be giving an overview of staying up to date and the update on RSS as well within Scopus, an overview of what Scopus is, why you would use the Scopus APIs and what for, the Scopus API data model and common use cases. And then Serhiy will be giving a detailed demo where he'll just kind of walk through a program that he has built, which will be quite exciting. And then at the end, as I said, I'll be back to provide some more resources that you can also access. And in a second, I'll also pop a link in the chat just to a PDF version of this presentation. So if it's a little bit easier for you to follow along with the PDF at the same time as the demo. So yeah, that's basically it. I will hand it over to Martin.
Thank you, Eileen. Okay, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about how to use the Scopus APIs to stay up to date with recent publications. And we're using the opportunity to help RSS users migrate to the API as well, as RSS support on Scopus will end on the 12th of August. APIs are much more powerful than the RSS functionality, but there is a trade-off. So APIs are a technical construct, and using them requires some technical expertise or access to technical staff. And we hope that this webinar will get you some way of bridging that gap. If you're not familiar with RSS, RSS stands for really simple syndication, and it's an XML web feed that allows applications to access updates to websites. So feeds are then read in a news aggregator, which is a program that can track feeds from many different websites. RSS usage, though, has declined globally and on Scopus for several years. The biggest news aggregator out there was Google Reader, and they shut down shop in 2013. And the last web browser that had RSS support was Mozilla Firefox, and they ended support in 2018. We're making big changes to the Scopus backend to introduce new content types in Scopus, such as preprints. And with these investments in rebuilding and improving the underlying architecture, we're also looking at what's worthwhile and what's serving the most amount of users. And the RSS implementation would require a complete rewrite, and its use has been declining over time. So with that, let's recap first about Scopus. So I know some of you might be familiar with APIs, but new to Scopus. So Scopus delivers a comprehensive view of the world of research, and Scopus.com allows you to track, analyze, and visualize research data from 5,000 different publishers. It covers 78 million items, including records from journals, books, and book series, conference proceedings, and trade publications across 16 million author profiles and 70,000 institutional profiles. And all of this comes together to power your research to help you stay up to date with recent publications, finding co-authors, analyze journals to publish in, and monitor global research trends. Conversely, if you're new to APIs, I'll go over some basics here first. So some of this will be a repetition if you watched previous webinars, as Eileen mentioned, for instance, the one we did on general Scopus integration, on the one on Scopus search, but I know that many of you are attending for the first time as well. So let's take a step back and look at what are APIs and why should you care about them. I find it easier to explain APIs using a comparison. So if you compare a graphical user interface, or GUI, that is the windows and buttons on the screen you interact with every day, to an application programming interface, or API. So websites are built to cater to our ability as humans to process visual information, comprehend it, and act on that information. So, and that is provided the usability is good enough. You generally know how to interact with search boxes, form fields, etc., that you see on the screen. So whereas a graphical user interface is built for humans, an API is built for computers to talk to one another. So what if you had to do 1,000 searches or submit 1,000 forms? That's going to get really tedious really fast using a graphical user interface, but using an API, that's perfect perfectly suited for the task. So APIs are incredible, to me at least, incredibly useful pieces of software that allows for real-time programmatic access to data. And it's really cool because they can automate really tedious tasks like the one I mentioned about 1,000 form submissions, and connect data from different systems or extend capabilities of different software. And they are ubiquitous. You probably use them hundreds of times at least already today, from your phone getting weather updates or stock updates, or if you buy something online, the online inventory system is probably communicating through an API, or just emails, your email client on your computer talking to the email server, seeing if there's new emails for you. That's also all done with APIs. Just like communication human to human, computer communication is governed by conventions, and these conventions are called protocols. So a computer protocol is an accepted set of rules for how two computer programs talk to one another. So on the web, the main protocol is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. And because of HTTP's popularity, you probably used it quite a number of times already, including getting to this webinar broadcast. Companies, it's generally used as a protocol for APIs. And HTTP communication centers around something called request response cycles. So a client sends a request to a server, asks for something, and the server sends a response with what has been asked for, granted that you have access to it. So this cycle of request and response constitutes an HTTP transaction. And you'll see a number of examples of this when Serhiy demonstrates his example program. But what about the Scopus APIs? So let's say you create a software application and you want to populate it with Scopus data, be it publications or articles or information around journals. You could download all the necessary data from Scopus and upload it manually into your application. Or you could use an API. So the API is the bridge that connects your software with Elsevier's internal systems that provide the data. What your software gets back isn't optimized by reading by humans, but instead made for computers to parse, manipulate, and make computations on. Generally, this will be a piece of XML data or JSON data. The difference here, of course, compared to the Scopus web app, is the response won't be a web page, but instead it will be this piece of code that comes back. It should be noted that APIs are technical constructs, and they do require some level of technical knowledge, as mentioned earlier. But even though there is a basic level of technical experience or expertise required, there are several different approaches you can take to get started learning or making use of APIs. And I'll come back to that later in this presentation as well. It's also important to know a bit about the underlying data you're working with, specifically with the Scopus data model. So Scopus relies on three fundamental data entities: affiliations, authors, and articles. And these are connected. Articles are written by authors who in turn associated with affiliations. So that's institutions or companies. Scopus APIs follows a consistent data model that allows for interoperability. So many API responses include request links to other APIs and support interoperability via common digital identifiers, such as DOI, author ID, affiliation ID, etc. And these unique digital identifiers is really what helps this disambiguation. The API supports a wide range of use cases, ranging from the simple to the more complex. Essentially, anything you can do in the Scopus web app, you can do through the APIs. You can use them to show Scopus publications on an author's web page, if you want to showcase institutional output. You can show Scopus cited by accounts, for instance, on an online CV. You can also use it to showcase metrics on an author or journal, or use that data for institutional performance analysis. There's federated search, which allows libraries to implement a single search across all the digital assets. Or, as we've been talking about today, automating the process to stay up to date with new content. There's integrations that can be done with CRIS systems like Pure, or institutional repository systems like Digital Commons. And finally, the APIs are used for business intelligence applications, such as benchmarking research performance or detecting trends through text mining. All of these things can be done through the API. Last thing I wanted to touch on before handing over to Serhiy is how the APIs are structured in Scopus. So you can think of them as 4 buckets. So you have the search APIs that where we'll be spending our time on today, which performs the equivalent of searching for documents, authors, and affiliations using the Scopus web app. You have retrieval APIs to fetch full abstracts, author profiles, and full affiliation profiles. And this is the equivalent of viewing these pages inside the Scopus web application. There's metric APIs, such as the PlumX API and the citation count API that provides metrics on citation data on entities. And finally, there's source metadata APIs that gives you metadata about sources, such as journals. So now that I've gone through what the APIs are on a high level, it's time to get technical. And I'm going to hand over to Serhiy, who will walk through an application that is written that uses the Scopus search APIs to stay up to date with recent publications. I want to preface this by saying that this section of the presentation is going to get quite technical, but Serhiy will do his best to explain what he's done so that people who don't work in code on a daily basis can follow along. And we'll provide the code for download if you want to play around with it. And we're also working on publishing the contents as an article, as a how-to guide that you can have access to later. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Serhiy. Take it away, Serhiy.
Thank you, Martin. Let me share my screen. Do you see it? Yeah. So, hello everyone. To demonstrate your SysFit alternative, I've built a small application. You should see it on the screen. It is API feeds application that use Scopus API to fetch data and notify user about updates. As an inspiration, I choose a popular news aggregator that supports RSS called Feedly. If you're familiar with this application, you would know how API feed works. Otherwise, don't worry, we go through it. What you see is the web application built on JavaScript. React.js was used as the view layer and Node.js as the web server. Application has 3 major parts. First one is top area. It allows us to create new feeds. You just type search term. For example, I'm interested in augmented reality, so let's search for reality. Press create API feed, and here we go. Left side. It has 2 parts. Top area contains control to turn on automatic updates, and next to it, you can see list with created feeds. Augmented reality, one of them. If you click on the title, we come to articles area, which is right side. And it contains all articles that Elsevier has. As soon as a new feed created, application may make a call to Scopus API and fetch data. Articles store on application side. Feed title mark with as updated with this light inside. Articles area contains a search query, date when this articles was fetched, and the list of articles. And article itself has title, which is also linked to Scopus document detail page, author and publisher information. There are two ways to get updates. First one is automatic. You can press this play button. What's going on? Okay, you can press play button. Yeah, and when you press it, countdown begins. When it reaches 0, all created feeds will be updated with the new data, if there are some. Let's wait 3 more seconds. Yeah, as you can see, we got new information about nanotubes, which was fetched today. Countdown starts from the beginning and so on. Second one is manual update. You can press this arrows button. As soon as you press it, it immediately make new articles check, and if there are some, it will be updated. Now let's take a look what is going on when we make some action. I open browser development tool by pressing function F12 button. It helped me to show how API feed make a call. So let's press these arrows once again, and we have a call. It fetch information from API Elsevier.com, search endpoint with specific query. In our case, is nanotubes. API respond with some data. Application take this data, compare it with the existing one. When the dataset contain new articles, they are indexed and stored on the application side. That is pretty much it about application functionality. Time to take a look on the code behind it. I open my development environment that's called IntelliJ IDEA. All the sources you can find on our public repository. You can check out the code, create your own sandbox and play a bit with it. I want to emphasize that it is not SDK. There are no plans to support or update this code. You can use it as an example, or if you want to build something on top of it, you are more than welcome. All the code located in SRC folder. There are 3 subfolders here is components, hooks, and lib. If you're familiar with model view controller pattern, you can treat these folders as concept of the pattern. Components is the view layer. It contains all the elements that are present on the page. Hooks is the controller. It creates bridge between data layer and the view. And lib is the model, data layer in our case. This structure is not following the pattern, but thinking in this way would help you to understand the idea behind this separation. Let's take a look closer. Components. As I said, it contains all the visual elements on the page. It's built using React.js library. If we take a look closer, articles. Articles folder contains components on display to display articles information. In our case, is everything that on the right side. Forms. Forms contain forms component that control form submission. It's form to create new feed and form to run auto update. List. List folder has elements to display list of feeds. So this part. And RSS container is basically create the general structure on the page. Hooks. Hooks has only one model. It has functions that control data flow from data layer to view. Lib. Lib is the heart of the application. Each layer of responsibility was split between different models to flexibility. For example, API. API, we have, under an API folder, we have two models that's responsible for working with Scopus API, basically Scopus API JS. Scopus API JS is the wrapper around the fetch functionality. Fetch function is the function that used by modern browsers to get data from the server. Basically, when you call fetch, browser create request and handle response. What do we have here? Scopus URL is endpoint to Scopus API. Pass document search is the pass to search functionality. And then we prepare some headers here. API key to have access to API. Martin will cover this later. And accept is we specify what type of data we are expecting from API. Then we set up some extra query parameters and result parser. And we have fetch functionality itself, which make a call to API and handle response. Second model is Scopus API parser. Here. This model with only one exported function, which will be passed to Scopus API. Let's demonstrate what it does. I open a browser development tool again. Sources tab at this time. And I put some breakpoints on this function. When we make a call to API, it ends up inside this function. We have a response from API. If we take a look what this response contains, we see pretty much complex structure, which we should handle somehow. And not everything from this response we are gonna use. So this function is supposed to simplify the structure, and when we run it, result is much simpler. It have much flatter structure, just array of simple objects with information which we're gonna use. So this is why do we need this parser. Let's go back. Next, feeds. Feeds has two models as well. Models are responsible for feeds-related functionality. Let's start from feed.js. Feed.js is the class that represents single API feed functionality. From perspective of user interface is, let me close this. From perspective of user interface, you can see it representation as the left side individual feed, nanotubes or augmented reality. And on the right side as list of articles. The class extends event emitter. Event that allows us to use events notification when something happened. One who wants to receive updates, create event listener function. This function will be called as soon as event is happen. Here we have two events. First one is happen when feed receive new articles. It helps us update list of articles on the page. So as you saw, when we press this auto updates, new articles came on the page. Second one is it happened when has new property change its value. It helps us to display or hide badge next to feed title on the list. Main part of this functionality is sync method. Here. Sync method does data synchronization between application and Scopus API. It makes a request here to the server to get list of articles. As soon as articles is there, we try to synchronize list within one which we already have on this method, sync articles. Sync articles call method find new articles. And this method compare articles that we already have in the application with the new one. If it goes through each article that came from server, check index. If the article is part of the feed index, we skip it. Otherwise, we create new list of articles. Then we try to, then we basically update data. Here. When we update data, new articles indexed, added to bench of data, and notify all listeners that new information came. Also, we have a couple of service methods here, like get fetch data, which prepare acceptable structure for storing data, and destroy, which is called when article should be removed. When feed should be removed. Controller. Controller is the model that controls list of feeds. From user interface perspective, you can see it as whole list of articles. Oh, sorry, whole list of feeds. It also extends event emitter here. And there are two events. One is called when list of feeds is updated, and another one when auto-sync should happen. Controller knows how to fetch data, how to sync them, how to load, create and remove feeds, run and stop auto-synchronization. Basically, it can do any manipulation with feed list. And store, local store. Local store is model that contain class that fetch existing data from storage and save updated data there. Theoretically, it can be any kind of storage, database, file system, etc. It has simple interface, fetch method to get data from the store, and save to save it there. Next one, API feeds. API feeds is the model which assemble all these pieces together. First, we create storage here with some configuration. Then we create instance of Scopus API. We specify that this API instance should call document search, configure API key, and some additional query parameters. In this case, sorting to have the most recent articles on top. Then we assign the parser function to the Scopus API object and create a feed controller. We pass here dependencies, Scopus search document API and storage. Finally, ask controller to load data. That's it. Basically, this is how the application works. Any questions?
Well, so if you have questions, which I'm sure many of you have, please type them in the Q&A section. I do have some more pieces to share before we conclude this presentation. So I'm gonna, Serhiy, if you unshare your screen, then exactly. So, and a big thanks to you, Serhiy, for that demonstration. That's quite a bit to go through. So I want to highlight a great resource to help you make use of the Scopus APIs, and that's our developer portal. To get started with the APIs, you have to get an API key, and you do that by clicking on I want an API key on the development portal. That's what highlighted here on the screen. And the developer portal also has examples, use cases. It also goes through the policies for what you're allowed and not allowed to do with the API. As well as providing links to our support. From the products menu on top, if you click on Scopus, you have access to everything that is Scopus related regarding Elsevier APIs. So you have the use cases, API specifications, interactive APIs, and resources. And I wanted to highlight the resources specifically. So you can have a look at previous webinars that we've done on the Scopus API, as well as general training material. So if this example that Serhiy went through was a bit difficult, I suggest starting out by some of our easier to digest examples here, where we walk through smaller programs in Python code. I also wanted to highlight, there's an overview on the developer portal. So we talked about what you're allowed to do based on use cases. However, if you wish to use the API for something that isn't mentioned in the policies, please reach out to us with a short description of what it is that you want to do. We'll evaluate each one of these requests and try to accommodate. It's also worth mentioning that the development portal has information how much data you can use on a weekly basis and how many requests per second you can perform using the API. And these quotas are set on a weekly basis. I promised that I would have some help if you're not a programmer but would still like to try the APIs. And there's tools out there like Postman and Insomnia to help you start exploring API functionality. And these are two tools I use myself on an almost daily basis. And they allow you to paste in API requests and get back responses and query them in an easy to use interface. Postman does a really good job of recognizing the variables in the query, so you can manipulate them without having to touch the URL. So for instance, if you wanted to try out the search API that Serhiy mentioned and you want to do different things such as trying out different sorting orders, etc., you can easily try that out using Postman. Insomnia is a tool that allows you to generate code snippets to paste in basically in almost any programming language, which is also really handy if you're writing your own program and want to start integrating with the APIs. And if you feel up to it, of course, you can download Serhiy's code and start playing around with it yourself. Serhiy used JavaScript with the frameworks Node.js and React. And there's tons of great resources on the web if you want to familiarize yourself with them. If you're new to JavaScript as a whole, I suggest checking out the Mozilla Developer Portal, which at least helped me a ton in my early career as a developer, learning JavaScript and the ins and outs of the language. You don't have to use JavaScript at all in order to work with the APIs, and you can use your language of choice, be it Python, Java, or R. Most of the webinars we have done in the past have been Python code. And if you want to explore those further, I suggest looking at JetBrains PyCharm Community Edition, which is free to use. It's a great integrated development environment. And there's tons of resources on python.org. And I can also really recommend Eric Mass's book, The Python Crash Course. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Eileen Christensen. Over to you, Eileen.
Great, thanks very much, Martin, and thanks, Serhiy, for that amazing presentation as well. Really good to follow through as well. Can you just go to the next slide, please? So I don't want to be too repetitive of what Martin has already said, because previously the webinars were hosted, we've hosted the last couple of webinars via BrightTalk, but now because we've added them all to the developer portal, you can actually find all of this stuff under the resources tab for Scopus. So these are the other two webinars that we ran more recently, and they're kind of listed in order of introductory or easy to use to more difficult as well. Also, the last two links are actually for two case studies that we've run with customers on like how they use the APIs. One of them was with Bill Michaud, and he basically used the APIs just to create like really powerful data visualizations. And we ran a webinar with him just to get a customer example, and also created a case study with him as well. So as I said, I've added a link to the presentation in the chat, so you can access like the PDF version with all these links in there as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then kind of like an inception going on there. I've actually added a link to the presentation within the presentation, so that you can download it there for yourselves as well. Serhiy's example is in there as well. And then there's also links just to our social media channels. So if there are specific things that you want to learn about or you want to know about, whether it's APIs or other types of webinars as well, please feel free to reach out to us via social media. We also have a Scopus blog where we do add a lot of information just about Scopus in general and the new releases and everything like that as well. So, and then next slide. More extra resources. This is just, as I said, links so that you all have access to them as well, extra reading materials as well. And the next slide. And then we come to the questions. We've actually received quite a few questions. So we have 15 minutes left. And so Martin has kind of gone through and let me know which ones, like kind of in what order to answer them as well, because there are a lot of questions. We're hoping to get through all of them. But so what I'll do is I'll read them out, and then between Serhiy and Martin, perhaps you can answer them. I'll start, easiest things, I'll just start at the top. So would the code also be made available on a repository like GitHub?
Yes, it's the short answer. So that's the link that Eileen provided in the presentation. So Serhiy's code is available on a GitHub repository.
You can see it, yeah, in the chat. If you scroll up through the chat, I know I put quite a few links in there, and it's also in the actual deck as well, so you can access it there. And the next one is, so to access Scopus, I need to use VPN. Can this VPN call be part of the script, or maybe I can run an update only after connecting the VPN manually?
So it sounds like you have some issues with your API key there. What I suggest you do is reach out to integration support at elsevier.com, because we can provide you with an institutional token, which is an additional authentication mechanism, so that we know that you are associated with that API key, which means that you don't have to run it from a specific API, a specific IP range.
Perfect, thank you. Also, the question that we get pretty much every webinar as well, are there any fees required to use the APIs?
So for paying academic customers, the API is included with the subscription.
Perfect. Okay. This is a longer one. Whoops, so just bear with me as I read it out. Does the RSS feed also include an updated status change of a publication? For instance, an article in press, once it becomes an officially published article, would then appear again in the RSS feed once it's no longer in press?
So this is one of the cool things, but I assume the question here is about the web feed that Serhiy presented, which is kind of a replica of existing RSS functionality. The cool thing about moving to the API is you could do these things using the API. So for instance, you could choose to ignore or include articles that are already present based on status changes to them. So that's information you can get on article level when you make the query. So this is also a nice part about the interconnectedness of the Scopus data model. So for instance, when you get your list of recent articles, you can see if you had this article previously, and you can query each individual article and look at their status.
Great, awesome. And short question, will saved search function be available in Scopus? Still be available in Scopus? Yeah.
Yes, there's no changes to the saved search function in Scopus.
Okay, perfect. Another question, is it possible to is it possible to use the API to stay up to date with research, not on the basis of keywords, but on the basis of an author's institutional affiliation? E.g., if I'm interested just in research from people from University of XYZ.
Yes, so this is also one of the really nice things about using the API, is that you could set up your queries in such a way that you would only subscribe to articles from a specific group of people. So that's absolutely possible.
Right. Yeah,
that could something be quite an interesting topic if we choose to, or if we do a follow-up webinar on staying up to date. We can do some of these more interconnected use cases of building on top of staying up to date functionality.
Yeah, and I'm hoping we will do more of, just for me to organize another webinar, that's also fine. They are really well attended, these webinars, and it's kind of an easy way to answer questions, I think, as well. And yeah, so I'm sure you'll get some more links to some future webinars that we'll organize. So another question is, how do you ensure that your API key is working? So my API key works on the Elsevier website to retrieve information, but when I try and use it with ElseAPI, I get error 401 that my key is insufficient.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have a similar issue to the one that I believe Ellen mentioned earlier. I suggest reaching out to integration support because it seems to be the API key itself looks at the IP range that you're coming from. So it could be that if your IP range has changed, you might need an additional institutional token so that we can authenticate you as you.
Another one. I'm interested in retrieving authors' performance metrics, so H indices, for example, which are available in Cyvel. Can I use my Scopus API key to obtain said information from Cyvel? If not, do I have to add a subscription plan or generate a different key?
So if you are a Cyvel subscriber with API access, then you certainly can use your API key to access the Cyvel API. Both the Cyvel API and the Scopus API are hosted on the same Elsevier Developer Platform, and they use the same authentication system. So I thought that was a really good one on interoperability between the two.
Yeah, yeah. So another question actually from Alan as well. So she asks, can I download Serhiy's code from GitHub, place it somewhere, and it'll run, and then can I modify it?
This is so great question. Generally, this is generally the answer is yes, but I'm gonna refer to Serhiy about the specific license that it's published under.
Thank you. Yes, you are free to download it, to modify, run, and use for your own purpose. The only thing, if there are some issues there, we are not supporting it, so you have to handle it by yourself.
Perfect. Okay, so will the API allow for searching by Scopus author ID number? So for creating RSS feed with for particular departments.
So that's a really good question, good one, and that's again the sort of the power of using the API for this as opposed to using RSS is that you can set up these queries. Now, what Serhiy did was he used the Scopus search API, added a search string, and looked at and sorted by original the load date. But you could just as well set up a search string where you search for articles by a specific author, or you filtered results by an author, because that's all possibilities that you can do using the API.
Perfect. I also have some people who are asking about the recording. Yeah, so this has been recorded, and I believe that everyone who has registered for this webinar will actually get a link to the recording. I will double check. I'm pretty sure that is how Zoom works. Mind you, this is the first time I'm using this, we're using this Zoom webinar functionality, so you should receive a link to it afterwards as well. Another question is, so will this update or change impact existing Scopus API currently used in AEM plugins?
I am not familiar with AEM plugins. There's no changes to the current Scopus API. The Scopus API will remain the same. All we're doing here is saying that due to ending support for RSS, you can use the Scopus API to get the same functionality plus more. Given, but there's a certain technical threshold.
Yeah. Okay, another question. Is it possible to query the author API with AUIDs to retrieve full author names?
Yes, you can get all author. Well, I would have to. If I remember correctly, you get all the name variants, including the full author name. So yes, absolutely. Hold on a second. Yes, absolutely. I just remember writing a program that did exactly that. So yes, you can.
Perfect. Also, there's another question here. So can API feeds be embedded in a website with HTML code like RSS feeds could, e.g. for a website that is built in a CMS and allows only rich text HTML or a CSS input?
I assume so. I assume what you could do is, I assume when you load an RSS feed, you're loading an XML feed inside an external website, and you could set up this in the same way that it would work. So you could instead of what Serhiy has done, you could output a very similar feed and display it on your website. So yes, absolutely. It would require some changes to the code, but there's absolutely nothing that would prevent you from doing so.
Okay. I think that's it for the questions. Let me just quickly have a look. That's it for all the questions. We've also answered a few of them by typing into people as well. Martin, so if people have any further questions with regards to the RSS feed, was there an email address, or was it just about reaching out to second line support for that?
So if they have questions regarding API functionality, the first point of contact is integrationsupport@elsevier.com. If you have questions around this webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to either me or Eileen. Yeah. And we can route the question accordingly or answer it ourselves.
Yeah, perfect. I do think that's it for all the questions. So thank you, all of you, and particularly thank you, Serhiy, for that the example that you walked through as well. It was really useful, I think, to everyone. As I mentioned, I think everyone will get a link to the recording as well. You can see my email address, I think as soon as you registered. So if you do have any further follow-up questions, feel free to email me, and whether I can answer it or it's more technical and then Serhiy and Martin will answer it, I will be sure to get back to you with an answer. So thank you very much, all of you, and we hope to see you again soon here in Zoom with another webinar as well.
Many thanks, Eileen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, Serhiy.